Welcome to CMOs Offscript. We're 5 experienced health tech leaders offering trends, tips, and honestly, a few hot takes. Let's do this. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of CMOs Offscript. My name's Nisha. I have the pleasure of hosting this week's episode. And this is a special one because not only do we have our whole crew here, hello, everyone. We're talking about something that is quite the topic and timely for Q4, and it's how to close the year strong. Whether it's times of uncertainty or anything else, I think that we're going to dive into some election topics briefly, but that doesn't just pertain to it being an election year. In fact, there are market shifts all the time, and so these tips are probably going to be pertinent as we go on. So probably very, very important for us to mention that up front. So how is everybody feeling about Q4? Thumbs up, thumbs down so far.
I'm going thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Generally, thumbs up.
Optimistic, but you have to have an optimist in marketing or we're all screwed.
It's so true.
So true.
So true. So let's dive right in. I think a question to really kick it off is when you're looking and you're starting off Q4 as a CMO, as a marketing leader, what's the first thing that you're looking for?
I mean, I'll quote a leader I worked with many years ago. The sun is setting on the year. The sun is setting on the year. So what we have in pipe is what we can potentially close unless we have some late breaking, quick closing offers or products. And everyone's sales cycle is a little different. Ours tends to be on average 6 months, longer when it's a higher ASP, slightly shorter if it's a little lower. And so, that's tricky. So what's left in the pipe is what you have, unless you have some, again, late breaking offers or quick close products. And we're also, as marketers, thinking about next year's pipe. And sometimes we've been thinking about it since the middle of the year because we are the precursor to pipeline. And, the new top of the funnel leads take time generally. So the sun is setting.
I think that's right. I'll plus one that. And I noticed that my team is being very reactive and attentive to the sales team. What do you need? How can we help? Is there anything we can do quickly to sort of move any needles for you? There's a few campaigns we're trying to run before the end of the year to, hopefully get some new leads in the door and build more pipeline for first quarter and first half of next year. But I think it is, agree with you, Julia, that you've kind of done all you can this year. There's a few rabbits you might be able to pull out of your hat, but it's a big focus on next year already.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're focusing on how can we support the sales team in moving anything over the line. I think we're also digging in on some sort of richer pieces that are, the client case study things, the things that are sort of later stage materials that help really move the needle. And so we're spending time on those type of projects right now. As we look at closing the year, kind of what can we also close out? What can we create in this last quarter of the year that is going to be really valuable for the team in closing something this year, but also in their toolkit for next year. So we're also focusing on things like deep trench battle cards for the sales team. How can we really help the sales team by building out their toolkit now, using our time for that kind of thing?
I love that. I think for me, we're definitely in a state right now where it is trying to close those deals and figuring out how and where we can support, whether that's campaigns, intent data, all of those things, factoring in any kind of additional content that's going to support the sales efforts around anything that's already very far along in pipe, bottom of funnel, and very much looking ahead to how do we set us up for a strong Q1? So I've got RFP season starting for a certain set of products where that starts in January. So I need to be doing a lot to prepare the runway and get those things going today as we lead into Q1, because otherwise, we're not even in consideration set. And so there's a whole host of exercises that we're doing. And so I really think it depends on, it is, yes, closing out the year strong, but also thinking ahead to what are the things that are coming up in the next quarter or two that you need to be prepared for? And do you have the right resources in place to be set up for success? Have you done the work leading up to the new year and the next quarter that you're ready to rock and roll when the time comes for RFPs or whatever the case may be? So really thinking about your sales cycle and the decision timeline for certain products is really important.
Yeah, great point, Amanda. I think you touched on something, and I think some of it that is really interesting about Q4 is balancing the aspect of we got to push out as many campaigns as possible, as well as how do we audit what's been working, what's not been working, and try to budget for next year and make sure that we've got our eye on the ball and we've got the right resources, we've got the right tools. And so any tips that you all can maybe suggest on how you strike that balance between both those things?
Ooh, that's tricky. But I think it's you've got to devote time to, you can't devote all of your time and place all the eggs in one basket of the current year. You've got to be looking ahead. And I think it is so easy to get caught up in we just need to close things out without that foresight. And, I've had those experiences where it's like just all hands on deck, whatever needs to be done. That happens, but it's often at the expense of, next year's sales cycle. And so if you know that you're going to be starting out Q1 of the coming year, you've got to be planning ahead. You've got to be thinking about the right tech stack. You've got to be making sure, looking at all of the data across all of these different dimensions, what things worked, what didn't, really looking at your messaging, what updates are needed there, and starting to look at that very holistically. And that takes time. And so it is a juggle, right? We're in a constant juggle of, are we focused on today or are we planning for the future? And it's very easy to get sucked into the moment. But if you're not planning ahead, Q1 is, you're not set up for success when you're walking into the coming year.
Well, I think that's such a good point. Balancing near-term thinking, let's close this quarter, versus and thinking about what do I need 3 quarters from now, a year from now? What software do I need implemented and successful and generating in 6 months' time? You have to decide now, perhaps. And so that's the rub. I'd love to just get a quick sort of roundtable, is it 50-50 near-term, long-term thinking? How do you think about that in your area?
I think it's a great question. I think I have my team focusing on executing the current campaigns, current projects in play. And I'm looking more at creating the budget for the next year for our different clients. What does 2025 look like? So I think that's where the October budgeting cycle is actually super valuable for marketers in planning, because it forces us to put numbers to our campaigns and our efforts at the end of the year in anticipation of next year. So I think of it as those in leadership positions are looking at budgeting cycles, future campaigns, where are we in the product development cycle? What are what's happening, what's coming out of product that we need to be paying attention to? What are the expectations being set by sales? And that really helps you build your story. So that's where I'm focusing, but my team is focusing on closing out what we have in queue at the absolute best we can. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, I will plus one that too. I think the other piece that strikes me, and Laura, I totally agree. I'm more focused on near term, but the very much longer term strategy and thinking about next year as my team really focuses on the immediate priorities. But I will say, depending on your company and when your busy season is, because for some companies it is fourth quarter and in others it's not. You've got to also be planning for holiday time, vacation time at the end of the year. That's kind of rough. as well as other things that are happening, including budgeting and people reviews and things like that. So, I mean, Nisha, you asked about tips and tricks. It's like one of the things you should do as an organization is think, is this the right time to do personnel reviews, or should we push that to a different cycle? Because shoving that on top of everything else in fourth quarter might not be the best idea if like first quarter is a bit quieter for you. So all of those big admin aspects, and sometimes you do your go-to-market launch for the year in January, and sometimes you're trying to do it in November or December to prep for next year. So the timing of some of those big launch initiatives and the personnel reviews and admin and stuff has to really match up with your business cadence and that flow.
I like a Q1 personnel review. I like it way better than Q4.
Definitely. I will just say one thing that I wanted to, comment on was I definitely don't want my team only focused on things for this quarter. And the reason why is because otherwise I got nothing ready for Q1. So, I mean, there is a heavy push, but my pushback is if I'm not having the team also plan for Q1 with me, then I'm not ready to launch campaigns. I don't have materials ready. I don't have things and content developed. We're not ready for Q1. And that gives me all the feels. And so I think there is that balance. I would say it's probably a 60-40 or maybe even 75-25 split, but it's gotta be, and that starts to take place towards the back half of the quarter. And yet that's tricky in Q4 because of, Bethany, what you just mentioned around holidays and vacation schedules, et cetera. So it's a very tricky time for so many different reasons.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I absolutely agree with all of these tips. I think one of the things that's the most interesting about Q4 is always, I think that's when we do the bulk of most of our, are we hitting our pipeline? Did we overestimate? Did we, going into Julia's comment earlier, because we're all in marketing, we tend to be overly optimistic in the beginning of the year when we're setting our expectations and our goals. And so looking back and seeing, learning from, okay, did we actually push out the amount of programs and campaigns that we set out to do and not? And that's where I believe that most of the time I like the 60-40 split where it's 40, but my 60 is leaning on what did we learn from the past year? And then how can we implement that the year going forward? And then 40%, yes, we need to drive to close and get everybody situated and making sure that they're actually pushing out and doing it in the bulk of the beginning of Q4 versus the end when, yes, lights off for everyone.
For sure. That's a great point.
I also don't think that we typically hit the ground running January 1st. So I like to have whatever campaigns I'm running at the end of the year push into the new year. So I give myself a buffer because I think there's this lag, everybody kind of coming back, getting reacclimated. If there's sales meetings, those are going off, pretty early on. And there's just it's just distracto zone. So I love sort of not having a hard stop at the end of December and giving yourself a buffer into the new year. And then, then sort of building those new campaigns. But to your point, Amanda, I think you cannot wait until January to think of what the January program is going to be. Full scale. That's just not going to work. So,
And on that topic, I think, we're going to spend the bulk of our time, I think, talking through not only some strategies around some of these aspects, but also get really tactical on what are we doing specifically. Mm-hmm. And we mentioned that depending on, whether when it's healthcare, but there's different buying seasons depending on what exactly you're selling. And typically it's either folks, you're getting them to close, right? We made that inference that if they're in their pipeline, it's about velocity and trying to get them to close the deal. Or it's about prepping them for the next year when they're budgeting, when your buyers, are making their budget decisions. and getting them brand aware, right? So more mid-funnel, bottom of funnel type campaigns and content. And then perhaps there's even, are we spending money top of the funnel to try to build that brand awareness for the folks who are budgeting, who are thinking about their budgets for next year, just like we are.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to do a little bit of a roundtable around these two aspects, or if you're seeing something else that's different, right? Around how do you balance all of these things? Because I'll be honest, I think one of the things that I've learned very early on is just not to burn out the team. Because there's so much demand in Q4 and vacations are being planned and And so how do you balance all of these? And I think that's like the number one theme that I'll probably be regurgitating is like, it's all about balance. But like, what does that really mean, right? To you all practically when it comes to execution?
Yeah, I'm nodding along because, one, I'm a generous listener, but two, it's so true. We have to strike that balance of supporting our team, helping them keep the lights on, but also being always active, thinking about the future. We're getting fairly seasoned at this time, and so what we know to be true through years, and we could add perhaps a couple decades, is still new for a lot of team members typically. And so I find I'm trying to support the energy of an excited team, or a team that's driven, or a team that simply has a lot on their plate. How do we support them? And also how do we keep, trying to make tomorrow a little bit better than it was today? So that's on the one hand about keep not burning out our team. But I think to your earlier question, how do we balance brand and demand? How do we, find the, awareness ratio to what we know will bring in, new form submits, new demo requests is really tricky. And I would say 10 years ago, I was very demand first, keep the lights on, do the minimal, do exactly what you need for, funnel building, for pipeline building. But I had an experience at a very early stage company where you can do all that, but if you aren't also tending to the brand, working on awareness, staying in the consideration set, showing up to the extent your budget allows, if you don't invest in brand and you have the experience where your sales team or your sales executive said, I went to this customer, they had no idea who I was. I called, they didn't, I had to explain who we were. This is what we do. And on the one hand, that's sort of traditional pitching. On the other, it's a real bummer when they don't say, oh, I know you guys, you did this. That's such a wonderful experience for a seller, so they don't have to spend the first portion of their introduction or their meeting explaining, well, this is who we are and this is what we do, because there's that bit of awareness. So I've come around about the demand and brand ratio to always want to include awareness tactics, even when it's tricky for your budget.
What I was saying is I want there to be lighters, in the concert, or, some way to let I just plus one that so much. Everything you just said, Julia. Absolutely.
Yeah, and on the brand side, I will say and I need to repeat this to a lot of the CEOs that I talk to on a daily or weekly basis. There's 3 ways that your company is differentiated. It's BOR, brand, offerings, and relationships. And those are the things that keep people coming back or having them come to you in the first place. And so you cannot forget about your brand being a real differentiator. It's many times there's a lot of copycatting in the market. It's easy to come up with, everybody's talking about AI. They're saying the same things. What is going to help you stand out? That brand consistency and those relationships that you have. And yes, of course, you need a top offering, but you continue to have to evolve and push all 3 of those things forward. And if you forget about brand, you're going to feel it really quickly. So yeah, you've got to keep that on for sure.
Well, I know we were supposed to be providing other tips or feedback, but I have to plus one that one too, because I do think it's super important. And I'm sitting in a very clear demand gen function right now. And it is in partnership with brand. I mean, just went through a merger and a rebrand. And like, it to me feels like especially clear that that partnership between brand and demand has to be close. And it's not a one or the other. It's a yes and I think folks want to lean into like key differentiators and you know, core messaging and product focus. And yes, and if we're not building that brand, you know, and creating that air cover for when our sellers are going out and having those conversations, it's a much harder conversation. It's a very different kind of conversation that you're going to be having versus the door is already open. You're being welcomed in and you can actually discuss and really have that consultative sell.
Totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you guys, how much are you thinking about November 5th and voting day?
What's November 5th?
What? Come again?
Yeah.
For the
we had actually scheduled something for the day after, and suddenly it like the lights, the like something clicked, and we were like, oh no! Like it wasn't firmly scheduled, but it was on our calendar as like, let's plan this for, and we were like, yeah, that's a bad idea.
Message for our listeners. We are weeks away from the next presidential election on November 5th. So good opportunity, marketers, to think about that week and what you might be scheduling or
not.
And the weeks leading up, and that you're competing at this point for awareness. And is it worth it to compete during the next few weeks, or do you dial it back down because there are more meaningful ways to invest your time than trying to compete in this sea of chaos that's happening right now?
Well, and so there's a theory, and I want to give this group credit, that the ad costs are skyrocketing because we're competing with all of the impressions that political campaigns or PACs are scooping up. Mm-hmm. Love to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it across the board, but we're really seeing it oddly in LinkedIn, which I don't think of as a political space. And we could attribute it to a lot of things, but across the board, ad costs are going up on LinkedIn right now, is what we're seeing. And
I would not have thought of LinkedIn as the first place for that to happen, or even the third.
Yeah. I even put an article out about it. I'll see if I can find it and tag it.
I think, so one theory I have, and we can debate it, is our marketers like us who are like, yeah, I'm going to try to maximize my dollar. It's not going to go as far in the places I typically spend it. I'm funneling my dollars into LinkedIn. So that could be one. Probably there's some political advertising that I'm probably not in the target audience for, I suppose, if I'm not seeing it yet. The other thing I'm wondering about, and I love your perspectives. So we are in the age of ABM where we are being as targeted as we can and specific to our buyer and who's in market, we think, due to intent data or intelligence. And so when we are targeting an account, we're willing to spend what it takes. And so like, I am spending more, but I'm per account or per lead from an acquisition, but it's because I've gone like this to a very narrow target account group. Which, by the way, I love.
Focus.
Like, the cost per lead I would accept when it was the old days in the before times is way lower than what I'm willing to accept when I'm doing that with my targeted account group. I'm much more happy to spend on a cost per lead or cost per account basis than I ever did.
Yeah, and I think in general, we're seeing an upwards of, and we can link the data point, but it's an upwards of 30% for just digital advertising right now because of all the political spending that's going on. And so to Julia's point, as marketers, do we just eat the cost for right now because we know that it's going to cost us 30% more and we just keep going? Or is the strategy to maybe pause and focus on some organic channels when it comes to our targeted group, because it could be that depending on, your focus, your targeted group, they're probably getting the same amount of political ads as they are anywhere, with what you're sending as well. So it could just be part of the noise that they're consuming. And so I wonder if there's a little bit of a let's pause for right now, wait things to settle, focus on organic, and then we jump back up when things, in a month or two. Would love, but what do y'all think about that?
I do think it depends on your buyer again, and how, you should know your buyer and how impacted are they by the election and potentially distracted by not only the election and all the things going on in fourth quarter, but for their own businesses as well. Like how much time are they having to be heads down now versus some other time? So as far as the election specifically and how, my philosophy is, I think you have to maybe be more provocative in your campaigns and actually get out there, because you're competing with a really interesting, news cycle and a really, interesting set of candidates and a lot going on behind the scenes. And so, and in front of everyone's eyes, frankly. And so people are addicted to that sense of drama. And so build that into your storytelling as a marketer when you're not just fourth quarter, I'll do it now for sure. But I think we have a lot higher bar to compete with, and your creative has to keep up with that as well.
I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's funny because I think, Nisha, as you were talking, I was actually thinking what does it take to stand out in this market? Right. And so I think, Bethany, to your point, you've almost got to skew even more. You've got to skew harder to being provocative and really grabbing people's attention when their attention is incredibly distracted and focused on all of these other things. That's hard. That's a lot of work, but welcome to the reality of today. Everyone is very distracted, just as a general rule. And so I think that your ability to stand out is that much more important.
Yeah. And I think that's such a great tangible tip to just look at all your digital ads and all the things that are going out, and to really think to yourself and ask the question, is this something that's going to stand out in this market? And if it's not, maybe I shouldn't spend unnecessary, budget on it. And maybe I need to rethink it and have the teams go back through another cycle. Julia kind of touched on this a little bit too, but when it comes to Q4, and one of the things that I want to make sure that we address, because it's something that I think that when we're trying to drive to close, and especially from a demand generation perspective and just trying to get pipeline converted, I think this is sometimes when new fresh ideas start to come up, where it's well, what about this? And have we tried this? And I think one tangible thing that to try to avoid burnout and to try to avoid spinning up new resources and new things, is just to focus on tried and true channels and things that have worked throughout the year, and to get the team just focused on those things. And if, you have counterparts in sales and other places that are coming up with we should try to go here. Have we tried maybe, talking about this in this way, or maybe we should have a new content piece. It's almost let's sit back and just focus on the stuff that we know are the things that have brought in the quick conversions and are working, and the channels that are working already, and try to avoid that. And so that's been I'd say that just to make sure that we've got our eye on the ball and we're still pushing out those demand gen campaigns. That's been my one go-to, but I'd love to hear a counterpoint, or if anything has worked for you all where there was you all had a great success doing a last minute pivot, or maybe a last minute launch Q4.
Gosh, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about, we've just released two pretty exciting offerings. One is part of our quarterly platform release, and it's an AI-enabled access to the healthcare map of Komodo Health. And it's a way that we are allowing business users, and I would consider us business users, to quickly gather insights that allow them to shorten the time when they're making requests of data scientists that are in a high code environment. And so I'm pretty excited about that. And it's the next release in our platform, but it's also like timed at a really great time in the year when we are, working with clients to understand, their next year objectives and how we can fit into those. And typically, time is of the essence. Everyone has fewer resources than before. And so the ability to save time or, access information quickly or create that sort of velocity advantage is something that's on our mind. How do we help our clients at this time in their calendar? Enough, we've been talking a lot about us. And I think the hard thing is our customers too have the same challenges. They have to do the best they can with the budget they have and do so within a time frame. And most companies are in a use it or lose it situation, or are trying to just make the next best business decision with the vendors and partners they have. So, just adding that note about what pressures they might be facing at this time.
I think that one thing you should be really, really conscious of as a marketing leader is the fact that when you do have an opportunity to move quickly on a piece of news in the market or something that's trending, that is a make or break moment for you and your team. So I love the idea of spending like 80% of your time on the tried and true and the things that are working. But I actually think that if you aren't equipped to be agile enough to react quickly, and I've seen my team do it, like they can put out a video in a couple days, they can do a campaign in 2 weeks. It's like a sprint that you're putting on. And I think that that's where you see brands really come to the forefront and break out of some of that just static, sameness that you're seeing across the board. And so I would really encourage leaders to think about like just listening for 1 or 2 opportunities a quarter where you can step forward in a very quick and agile way to take advantage of that opportunity from a campaign perspective.
I love that. And I think, there's that combination of both public news as well as internal news. And sometimes those things happen. Sometimes those are things that you can plan for and sometimes they aren't. And so that ability to be agile and adapt and react and respond quickly, I think I've been in organizations where it works better than others. It really depends. I also think in those types of situations, you've got to make sure that you've got support from leadership, particularly when it's, newsworthy moments. And I've been in situations where I'm like, this is our moment. This is a place where we have something to say and we should be saying it. And it feels wrong to miss the moment. And it's pulling teeth and you can't get over the finish line on it. So I think that's also part of the planning process is having those conversations when you're not in those moments so that you can, as a team, react and respond accordingly and have the partnership and support from leadership to actually get those items over the finish line. So, is your organization interested in saying something about the election or not? Is your organization interested in saying something about a, change in policy or not? Like those kinds of things feel really important to have, discussions and conversations about outside of the cycle so that when the cycle does hit, you're ready to react and respond quickly.
Such a great point, Amanda. And we've talked about a lot of tips over the past couple of minutes, and I'd really encourage our listeners, if you have questions about a certain aspect of this, please let us know. We probably could wax poetic about one topic for more than 2 hours. And so we tried to hit as much as we could in this session and would love to hear some feedback on if you think it resonates or if you have further questions. And to wrap up this episode, I'd love to just see if there's anything that we didn't touch upon when it comes to closing out the year strong, making sure that there's momentum, making sure you've got your eye on the ball. Did we miss anything?
I've got one last point, which is don't forget to thank your customers. This is a great time to send a gift, send a holiday card, send something to call out appreciation for them, thank them for their business, thank them for their partnership across the board. And so that's something not to be forgotten in fourth quarter among all the other things you have to do.
Brilliant.
Could not agree more. Amazing.
Love it.
Love it. Customer love.
All right, you all. I so appreciate you being here with all of us today, especially given that we are probably in one of the busiest seasons from our where we sit from a marketing leadership position. I so appreciate all of you. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks everybody.
Everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for this episode of CMOs Offscript. This podcast was made possible by Breezy Hill Marketing. Don't forget to explore the podcast notes or CMOsOffscript.com for additional insights and resources. Until next time, be bold and stay curious.